No, it is a roll.
It's
It's no, it is. Yeah, that one, no. Yeah. Well, so it's intriguing and thinking of.
Must be nice. Yes, yeah.
All right, good morning. How was everybody hanging in there? It was a good weekend of football. I didn't have any stress on weekend, so
That's what is lost, so.
you know, they always lose one.
It's so bad.
I know. If they have, I saw somebody posted this like meme of them yesterday. They have this cycle that they go through every year of like, we're doing good, we're crushing it, we're gonna make the playoffs, we're gonna make the Super Bowl, and then they lose. Like every year. But the 49ers look good. The Bills lost, which is too bad. But Mahomes is my other guy, so I'm rooting for him. I've got my Mahomes socks on. It's ready. Right, I don't know, I should. My kids make fun of me, but they buy me socks every Christmas. I'm like, I'm a good parent. I wear the socks you give me. Okay? I had a lot of cake this weekend. Good weekend. So I had another thought. I'm thinking about football and cake. That's like completely distracting. So I'm going to pass this around. I'm no longer going to take attendance. And I printed this morning. So if you are enrolled in the class, your name should be on here. If you aren't enrolled in the class, your name is not on here. So if you don't see your name, make sure you check in with me after so we can figure out why. And what I'll do is I'll pass this around every day, and if you could just like initial or sign your name in the box for the date, that would be great. It's not worth points, but it helps me keep track of who's here. And if you want to make any notes on here to change your name or an abbreviation or anything, go ahead and do that, and I will update it for next week so that it says what you would like it to say. This is just straight from like the Canvas registration system. So feel free to write any notes on there, and I'll update it. And again, if your name isn't on here, make sure you check in with me, and hopefully it'll make its way through. If you miss it for some reason, you can sign it at the end, and that's fine. But hopefully everyone can get to it every day, so I can keep track of who's here. And other than that, we will move to chapter 2 today. So we're one chapter down. This is week 3 of the semester. Like that feels wild to me that it's already week 3. It feels like it's going really quickly. But what we'll talk about in chapter 2 is sexuality research. So how do we conduct research? Who are some of the big sex researchers that have made a big impact on the field? Focusing mainly on one really big guy who we'll watch like a 25-minute like excerpt from a documentary on later today. But we'll talk a little bit about some of the theories, the researchers, research methods. We're going to do a little psychology, human sexuality research together as well, which I think traditionally tends to be kind of fun. We'll see how it goes. But as a quick side note, I have this picture here about the birds and the bees, right? This little researcher, and I'm sure you've all heard that before. Like if we're gonna have the talk about the birds and the bees, just a little like metaphor that we often use in talking to children about sexuality, right? So bees carry and deposit pollen into flowers, which is a very easy to understand or like visual example of male fertilization. And birds lay eggs, similar to how women have eggs. That's where the birds and the bees idea comes from, if you've ever been curious. I have to tell you that my partner and I have been putting this off. We were supposed to have the birds and the bees conversation with our 10-year-old this weekend, and we didn't do it. Shame on us, right? I actually am like, let's do it. I'm really like ready to do it. Kind of like feel like I can do it. Like I teach this class. My partner's like, I don't even know where to start. Like she's 10. My daughter, I may or may not have told you this. She for some reason thinks that human sexuality is related to Sir Francis Drake. Like, and I don't know where the connection came from, but she's like, when are we going to talk about Sir Francis Drake? And I was like, I don't understand. But she's like, when are we gonna talk about like Sir Francis Drake? You know, Sir Francis Drake. No, I have no idea what that means. Apparently, when we have the sex talk, we're talking about Sir Francis Drake. I'm gonna tease her. I'm gonna write this down somewhere so when she's dating someone someday, I can be like, remember when you thought it was about this, right? I don't even know where that came from, but the sex talk. What was that? An explorer, right? Like a famous, like old explorer. I don't know. I'm gonna have to look up where, like, I don't understand the connection, but apparently her teacher said something like, he's such a guy. He's like, we're not gonna talk about like the things that girls go through. Like, oh God, you're gonna teach her this? I really gotta step it up and have this talk before he does. So anyway, random note, that's what the birds and the bees comes from, that like that metaphor, just as a side note. And wish me luck. I'm ready, but we're putting it off apparently. She's 10. She has no idea about like sex whatsoever, like none, so sheltered. And so it'll be an interesting conversation. Random things for you to know. No, anyway, back to this. So a little bit about theories of sexuality, but I'm not going to focus on this. This is something that I'm actually going to have you kind of look over a little bit more on your own. But the textbook starts with this idea of a theory. And psychology is all about theories. We have a theory for everything, right? Because there's a lot we still don't know. So theories are sets of assumptions or principles or methods that are going to help us to understand something that we are studying. In our case, we're studying and trying to understand human sexuality. Right. And so these are theories or models or ways of viewing a phenomenon. And they provide us with like an intellectual structure or a way to view something. And theories in psychology, they often really clash and overlap with each other. And this is something that comes up in like every lower level psych class. Like literally in our class before this, we were just talking about models or theories, right? And there's a lot of theories related to sexuality. Right. And so what I want you to do is make sure you look over these in the textbook. They are on page 28. They start on page 28 in the book. Because I might ask you questions about them, but I'm not going to lecture on them. They're kind of something that is important to know, but not necessarily something that I want to spend our time focusing on. But we can look at how we can view what has contributed to our current sexuality in a lot of different ways. We can look at like childhood influences or behavioral influences, our thinking patterns, the things that we've learned, the kind of evolutionary perspectives related to it. So make sure you look these over in the book just a little bit, as again, I might ask you some like matching questions related to them on that first exam. But where I really want to focus instead is on the researchers and on doing some sex research. I think that's a little more like relevant and interesting. So let's talk about some of the big sexologists, right? The professionals who study sexuality. So a future career choice for you. What do you want to be when you grow up? A sexologist, right? A sex researcher. And there's actually a lot of need for this. We don't have enough research related to sexuality, right? There's a lot that we still don't know. And if we look at the research that we do have, going back to like the 19th century, we have focused really on like the bizarre, dangerous, and unhealthy aspects of sex, rather than maybe what's more common or normal or typical or healthy. A lot of our research related to this has been on kind of the negative side, right, or the unhealthy, kind of bizarre side. And it's something that's been largely conducted by doctors and physicians, rather than people who maybe have a more global understanding of sexuality. Very problem-driven, very fragmented. And what you'll see when we talk about some of the people who have done this research over time is that it's very heavily influenced by politics and events of the time. A lot of the early sex researchers found themselves without jobs, found themselves shunned in the academic community, found themselves in jail for publishing pamphlets related to sexuality that were deemed inappropriate, right? So this is something that has very much been controversial and very limited. We've come a long way since the like 1950s, and we'll talk about Kinsey and some of his research and so on, but there's still a lot that we don't know. And so if this seems interesting to you, if you're a researcher at heart, like sex research, definitely an area where we have a lot of need for further understanding. So there's a lot of smaller like contributors.
And I want to mention them, but what we'll focus on again is a couple of people on the following slide. But these are some of the early folks that played a role in helping us understand what we know today. Starting with probably the most influential and most commonly known psychologist, Sigmund Freud. Right, Freud did a lot of research related to sexuality. His theories were very sexually driven. He talked about the libido, that sexual energy that we all possess. Super controversial ideas. He's really well known for things like falling in love with your mother and wanting to kill your father and the Oedipal and Electra complex, things that have really been debunked. But he was one of the first to talk about sexual and aggressive urges. Right? And a lot of the psychologists that came after kind of took his ideas and molded them and built on them. But he was one of the first and early sex researchers in the field. We also have people like Ewan Block and Magnus Hirschfeld, Richard von Krafft-Ebing, Havelock Ellis, and Clelia Mosher, a lot of like individuals that had smaller contributions early on. Havelock Ellis wrote a book called The Studies in Psychology of Sex. It was so dry and boring and medically driven, but it was one of the first books written about sexuality. Magnus Hirschfeld founded the first Institute for Sexuality, where people could go for advice and help. It was vandalized repeatedly, broken into, windows broken constantly, like very negatively received in the community. Other people writing books, right? So Richard von Krafft-Ebing, right here, wrote this book, Psychopathia Sexualis, about some of the early, like kind of abnormal sexual behaviors. Really like interesting cover, kind of makes you want to read it, I think, a little bit. Again, kind of medical and boring, which is disappointing given like what it looks like on the cover. But all of these people finding like early institutes, finding journals, starting societies, right? Trying to advance the idea that sexuality is something that we need to study. And again, a lot of them found themselves really viewed very negatively in their communities, found themselves in jail or in trouble or being attacked for putting these ideas out there. And it was very controversial to study sexuality in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And Freud was really one of the pioneers to help us kind of take some of that awkwardness or power away. Though his ideas are very heterosexual or heteronormative in nature. And we've come a long way since then. So these are some of the early folks. I won't really ask you about them. The ones that I want to focus on are these three. So these are kind of the three bigger people or groups of people that contributed very heavily to what we know today. Starting with Alfred Kinsey. And we're going to watch, as I said, a whole like excerpt of a documentary on him. He is probably the most influential researcher in terms of sexuality of the 20th century, right? He was one of the first people to really examine sexuality in a very scientific way. A lot of flaws with his research, which we'll talk a little bit about after I show you the documentary. But he was a very prominent figure in bringing sexuality knowledge to our country and to people. Masters and Johnson, right? Another group that did a lot of research. Masters and Johnson, there was a whole documentary made about them recently too, where they studied how people respond when having sex, mainly like male, female, like heterosexual couples. But what they would do is get people to volunteer, and then they would hook them up to various instruments to measure how their body responded during sex. So they would have a couple literally engage in like intercourse in front of them. They'd record the entire thing with a camera and record the entire thing in terms of how the body responded. Now, some of you gave me this look, like look of horror, right? How many of you, like, you don't just think about this in your head, you don't have to raise your hand and admit it, but would you be willing to volunteer for something like that? Like if a researcher came up to you and said, we're trying to understand how people's bodies respond during sex, to be willing to have sex in front of me so I can record your responses for the sake of science, right? Answer a questionnaire, willing to be surveyed and interviewed, but I think that's beyond what I would be comfortable doing, right? And I'm sure it's for science, so you would be willing. Maybe. Some issues with sex researchers and the research
like people who are willing to do that, is that the typical normal person, or is that maybe somebody different? There's issues with this, yeah,
Stay long enough to figure out if it actually was like.
okay. You're like, I need to see some credentials, what, and I was like, this, you know, living down in a very credible location, yeah.
I used to be probably these days that you could like look it up digitally and then really not do it, like.
Yeah, maybe now. So
Yeah.
this was more like during the 70s.
Yeah.
And so we didn't quite have that
Well,
technology.
yeah, I'm sure, but like now.
Yeah. Now it could be like we send you home with this equipment, you do this at home and then we collect the data
Okay.
later, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, that should be more willing for
Yeah.
some people, right? I mean, literally, like hooking you up to instruments that measure like blood flow, right? To see at what point you're getting an erection, at what point you're having like points of arousal, right? And so they are the ones who discovered like our sexual response cycles as a result of this research, but very controversial, yeah.
How do you even find people for that?
Yeah.
How-
Hundreds of people did this, hundreds, thousands of people volunteered, right? Yeah, yeah. A little ad in the paper went out, right? Yep.
Okay.
Mhm.
that's-
Oftentimes- An incentive. Oftentimes people were paid to participate in this kind of research. Ads were put out in papers on college campuses, flyers were put up. And so, you know, there was a lot of recruiting done. But again, we'll talk about samples of convenience and sampling issues. There might be something different about people who are willing to do this than people who might not be willing to do this in terms of the data that we collect. But really fascinating because of these two, we learned about how the body responds during any kind of arousal, right? So their research was important, super controversial, and like a lot of sampling issues, but really important. Evelyn Hooker, probably the best name you could ask for, right, for a sex researcher. Not really, I mean, but Evelyn Hooker, another person who was really instrumental in her research. She was one of the people that challenged the notion that homosexuality was a mental illness. All the way up until 1973, being homosexual was in the DSM, right? It was considered a psychological disorder to be identified as being gay or lesbian or bisexual. Her research was one of the first to challenge that and get it removed from the DSM. So these are some of the more prominent people, but Kinsey by far gets the credit of being the most influential sex researcher of our lifetime, of our century. And so I want to show you part of a video about him. It's a documentary about his life. Really interesting guy. He wasn't interested in studying sexuality. He studied bugs. Right, that was his thing. He was an entomologist, right? And so he came from a very scientific perspective, and it was such a different time. In order to take the first human sexuality course that was developed, you had to be married, right? So people would get married to take this class, right? Can you imagine like faking your wedding or faking a marriage or moving up your wedding date so that you could take this class? Like you had to literally be married in order to be able to take the class. Such a different time. So I'll play this for you and just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. We knew so little at the time that he was teaching these first classes and doing this early research. And he contributed heavily to what we know now, but he had a lot of issues too in the research that he did. And thankfully I had that, otherwise who knows if it would have worked or not. But Kinsey, as I talked about, probably, you know, the most influential guy and like such a different era. Can you imagine borrowing my car, having sex in it, and then returning it to me? Like just a different era. I'm like, my poor truck, right? Like borrowing my truck, using it and returning it. Like he hosted parties at his home, you know, to help his students, like who had no knowledge of sex. Like in a way, kind of cool, right? In another way, like so different. And I don't know if it's good or bad, but he was such an influential guy. And he was one of the first to conduct research on the scale that he did, right? There were a lot of issues though with his research, and this obviously isn't a research methods class, but the issues that he had was he really used what's called a sample of convenience. He used his students, right? There's issues with that. And he asked so many people, but it wasn't a random sample. And so there's a lot of like psychometric issues with the stuff that he put out there, but he interviewed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. It was the first large scale related to sexuality, like research project that happened. And just a couple of thoughts here related to problems that he faced and that a lot of people do face with sex research. You know, you have to get consent, right? And so as students in his class, this presents some issues. So I could use all of you in a research study, but I can't make you feel like you have no choice but to participate, right? And it also presents problems in that you are, again, a sample of convenience. But whenever you do research, you have to get people to agree to participate. They have to know what they're getting into, and they have to agree to it. And they have to have the freedom to say no, which as a student of a professor conducting research can sometimes get a little bit tricky. Because what if you feel like they won't like you or they'll punish you for not participating in the research that they're doing? You also have to maintain confidentiality. And he did a good job with this, right? Of making sure that the data was super general and broad, and that you're not saying like, well, this person said X, and identifying that individual. But where he ran into a lot of issues, and we talked about this a little bit with like Masters and Johnson, there's a volunteer bias in human sexuality. A lot of people aren't comfortable participating in sex research. And so how does that maybe skew our results? Right? You have to get a random sample in order for the information to be valid. So if I, for example, wanted to know about the average sexual behaviors of women, right? How many partners women have, how often they engage in sex, how many orgasms they tend to have, like the whole range, right? And I only ask prostitutes, I'm probably not going to get a good representation of women in general, right? As part of research on women's sexuality, I would want to ask people who are prostitutes, but people who are celibate as well, people who are in relationships and people who are single, people who were gay, straight, bi, like whatever, orientation. I would want to get a range of people who are young and old and all over the board. Right. And so what Kinsey did is he really had a sample of convenience, his students, the people at his college. And while that was amazing to get that information, it biases the information a little bit as well. And so he ran into some of those problems. And that's something that we see a lot with sex research. Again, is there something different about people who are willing to volunteer to be recorded having sex than the average couple or the average individual? Maybe they have more comfort and their sexuality is a little bit different. We also get a lot of issues related to validity and reliability. People are uncomfortable sharing their sexual information. Maybe they lie, right? You ask them questions and they might not know the answer, or they might not tell you the truth. You might ask somebody, what is your sexual orientation? And they don't know what that means, right? And so they tell you something that's off, or maybe they just don't know the answer to it. If you have people who are in groups versus alone, that can skew the results. If you go up to a group of people and ask questions, they might lie because they feel pressure from the people around them, versus if you ask them individually. If you're a male or female researcher approaching male or female participants, that might affect your results. So we see that in research in general, but it's very prominent when it comes to sexuality research. And I want you to have an opportunity to experience this a little bit. So we're going to do something, and I've done this like 8 or 9 times. It's always interesting. And I think it's always an experience. Some of you are like, look uncovered, like you're nervous, right? And I'm not going to make you like participate in anything. You are going to be the sex researchers. And so what I want you to do is I want you to find a group of people around you. For our last like 15 minutes that we have, we're going to kind of get started on this. But next class is when we're really going to like dive into it a little bit more. I hope you still come. Don't like not come because you're nervous, right? But what I want you to do is I want you to find 4 or 5 people around. Okay, which is whatever's convenient. And you're going to spend the next like 15 minutes together. So you can trim your desks or whatever you want to do. But as a group, you are going to be doing some sex research together next class. But we're going to think about it now so that we can start to build up to it. What I want you to do as a group is come up with a couple of possible topics that you would want to know more about. I want you to try and narrow this down as much as you can. Like, be specific. Don't pick something really broad. Pick something very specific and concrete. Like maybe you want to know how often do people masturbate? Which was the first thought that came to mind. I don't know. How often do people masturbate? Okay, so maybe that's your topic. I want to know how often people masturbate. What questions would I need to ask in order to get that information? And it might be as simple as how often do you masturbate, right? But it might be more involved than that. If you're asking about a topic that's a little more complicated, you might have a couple of questions. And then what would I want to know? Like what demographic information might be interesting to collect? Like if we're talking about masturbation, is somebody religious or not? There tends to be a correlation between religion and masturbation. Are they older or younger? Are they in a relationship or not? Maybe that plays a role. What kind of demographic information would be interesting to collect, like age or relationship status, religious status, orientation, gender, any of that kind of stuff? So as a group, it might be a few minutes of you kind of talking about some concepts and ideas, but try and pick one or two and run with it. What would be some questions you might want to ask, some information you want to collect? Now, you're going to be asking these questions to other people. Keep that in your mind as you're coming up with this. So try and keep it like, tangible, keep it something that you could actually. Going to be going out and observing people like making out and having sex. On it next class. So find a group, get started. I'm going to wander around. And maybe I'll touch base with you in like 8-10 minutes or so and see how you're doing. But find a group and get going. Try and narrow it down as quickly as possible so that you can get some information on that paper.
Oh.
Oh, okay. I like that one. Oh, this is like that.
I didn't really.
Yeah. They have like what the question is not one like that, but like we can't ask everyone. Because I guess yeah. Yeah, I got it's like the word. Two questions.
Or
It's big thing. Yeah. We're like. Basically, yeah, they're. Yes, yeah. 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 Really more comfortable.
Literally. People. Yeah, it's not. It's not. It may be. Yes. Yeah.
I like this question. Kind of excited for all of you. Yeah. So, it's like what I want you to do in these last like 2 to 3 minutes is as a group, like the question or questions that you have, just try and get them written down as best you can. Right? Keep thinking about them. And between now and Wednesday, keep thinking about it. Like individually, you don't have to get together at all, but you don't have to do anything outside of here. But be thinking about these things up here, the information you might want to collect, how you would think about doing this. What we'll do on Wednesdays, we're going to get back into our groups, right, and talk about it a little bit more, come up with a specific plan before we go out and do this during class on Wednesday. So please come on Wednesday. Don't be scared and not come. Please come, because what we'll do is you won't all have to ask this. You can divide up as a group however you want. But I'll give you about 2 more minutes as a group. Just get any last thoughts down. Anything else that you can come up with before we run out of time. So take a couple more minutes and then we're done with it.